Can we, good in the room? All right, we're all set.
Okay. I'd like to call to order the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for Thursday, April the 8th, 2021. Call to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Public comments. Public comments would be for anything other than the text amendments that are being presented today. Any public comments? None?
We don't have any virtual.
Okay. Meeting minutes review.
Motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Extension request, no extension request. Updates, legislation and legal matters. Amy?
She's going to give you one update as well.
Okay.
Morning. Happy spring. We've spoken about extensions for projects, and Sheila Tolliver had asked us to look into this before she stepped off the board. And something that Rob and I discovered in reading the code very closely is that our code already has an extension protocol, and I think that the county has been following a policy rather than the statute in this regard. So I would point your attention to several provisions that already have a duration of site plan approval of 2 years. So our general practices in 18.1-7D establishes a duration of site plan approval at 2 years from the final approval date, and an extension may be requested for reasons beyond the control of the applicant. And then in our site plan provisions, 18.1-154 and 155, conditions of Planning Commission approval also includes a schedule for the commencement of construction activity within that 2-year approval period. So if a project has substantially begun construction within that 2 years, there's no need for an extension. But also Section 55B identifies the duration if all construction is not completed within the required time of approval. The approval is void if the Planning Commission established under the Planning Commission for completion of all construction. So, and that is working actively on completing the project. Obviously, the project doesn't have to be completely finalized with construction. So what we would like to do is obviously bring these points before you and ask you if you would just like us to apply the law moving forward rather than the policy, and that applicants won't need to come before this board after a 6-month period. And should they need an extension after a 2-year period for good cause, that is when an applicant would come back before this board for extension.
We could get the update from you every 6 months in our monthly report, right?
Good, yeah.
I mean, that would be helpful.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And that way it just doesn't fall off the edge of the earth. Mm-hmm. We don't lose anything. What do you say? I like the idea of following the law rather than policy. Yes.
Agreed.
Is that all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Great. We'll follow the law.
Okay.
Right, so for the last probably 2 years, the Critical Area Commission has been working on drafting legislation for renewable energy solar within the critical area. So as of March 8th, those have become effective. So basically what it is, it's mostly related to renewable energy, but also utility scale solar for the most part. So they have identified major and minor as two separate, how to identify those scales, 2 megawatts or more being a major, and then obviously less being the minor. It doesn't include like your residential ones where you see people having it on their roofs or in their yards or anything. But basically the provisions address buffer disturbance, lot coverage, also tree clearing. Within the critical area, there's 3 separate designations. The limited development area would allow for somebody to remove 20% of the vegetation on the property for utility scale solar. But then the RCA, Resource Conservation Area, would only allow them whichever is less, 10 acres or 20%. So they're also another big probably difference with this is they're not counting it as lot coverage. Most things within the critical area count as lot coverage, but they have decided that the solar does not need to count as lot coverage, although for your residential properties, that counts as lot coverage. There are stipulations for it to not count as lot coverage. It has to be in some type of agricultural use, or it can be a pollinator species grown underneath of that array. But in the resource conservation area, there's also a couple more stipulations. One is it has to be 300 feet outside of the mean high water line or the tidal wetlands. And also, you do have to do a reservation on your development rights. So if you have 60 acres of solar, you have to reserve 3 development rights on that property until the decommissioning plan is completed. So those provisions are going to have to be incorporated, obviously, into the county code.
Ms. Jones, for the tree removal piece that you mentioned, are there any mitigation requirements for
Yes,
that?
it's 1-to-1.
1-to-1, thanks.
Yep. I'll say they do allow one access through the buffer, which is a bigger difference, really, I think. But that has to be mitigated at 2.5 times that area of disturbance. And it has to be, there's no other room and no other access way.
It points out to me how the solar lobby and the state's priorities about solar are so strong that the Critical Area Commission has been talked into allowing this in the RCA when we have fought with them for 30 years for any development in the RCA. And now all of a sudden, potentially 200 acres of steel, aluminum, and plastic is okay in the RCA.
For the most part, commercial and industrial uses aren't permitted in the RCA.
Solar is now.
And in fairness,
There's no fairness there.
there wasn't a prohibition on utility scale solar and RCA before, and RCA is included in our current zoning for utility scale solar arrays. So this has already been permitted in RCA here, and it was not prohibited at the state level. The state has just codified their support of it.
So it shows you what we're up against at the state level on any issue regarding solar.
All right, anything further?
But under legal matters,
Okay, miscellaneous staff items.
so I'd like to start by introducing our 2 new planners today who are with us. Rob Tracy is our new long-range planner. He comes to us from Kent County. He was a community planner with Kent County, where he was responsible for not only development review, but also legislative updates. He also has experience as a legislative aide, so his talents will be put to great use in our long-range planning division, and he'll be working directly under Stephanie, assisting her with the comp plan update and ordinance updates and text amendments. Also on board is Steve Johnson, who comes to us with almost 20 years of experience as a plan reviewer and a well and septic sanitarian. That's it. He working with Talbot County and also in Kent County. So he has a lot of experience working with site plans and subdivisions.
Did you leave anybody in Kent County?
No comment. But let's just say that we have a really, really great team with a lot of great experience. And I'm definitely mindful and sensitive to the fact that we have depleted some of Kent County's wonderful staff. And we're grateful that they've applied and that they've landed here. But Steve also, in his experience, really has a familiarity with all of our contractors and surveyors. So his experience will be put to great use in working with Rob on development review, and he'll be staffing projects before this board and the Board of Appeals. And he will be assisting Rob, and Rob will be managing his projects. So.
Okay, good. Special meeting?
It's for the comp plan for your the community facilities.
The one on June 24th?
Yep. So you need to make a motion, basically.
Oh, we do?
Yes.
Okay. Can I get a motion from someone, Kathy, maybe?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion
Okay.
that the Queen Anne's County Planning Commission hold a special meeting to discuss comprehensive plan workshop on environmental and community facilities on June 24, 2020 in this,
2021.
sorry, wrong, 21, in this building at
45.
8:45 a.m.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so be it.
Do not take us back to June 2020.
Don't take us backwards yet.
Okay, the Historic Aerial Imagery Project.
Sam has this phenomenal resource, and we wanted to give him an opportunity to share it with you and with the public so that everyone knows where it is and what it does. So thanks,
Okay.
Sam.
Just give me one. Morning. My name's Sam Stanton. I am the GIS coordinator, just Geographic Information Systems coordinator for Queen Anne's County, and I just wanted to give you guys a quick overview and, like Amy said, just kind of make you aware of this project we did and this resource we have. So, historic imagery. So we set about, or I set about, to acquire. There's lots of historic imagery available from the USDA. And I guess the history is after the Depression, the USDA started all these great programs to help stabilize the agricultural industry. So then they started using aerial imagery for compliance. So every couple of years, they would pretty much fly aerial imagery of the entire country. So a lot of this stuff we found, the years are listed there, but it goes all the way back to 1937. So we picked years that kind of spaced out along the way. The sources, so there's actually all of this imagery is held in the USDA's Aerial Photography Field Office in Salt Lake City, Utah, and they have a great staff there. And it was a really interesting process, and you just had to identify your county and the years you were looking for, and a lot of it was already digitized. Some of it they had to take out the old, the original cans of film and digitize them, and they just sent them to us. So it was great. So the next step, and then I'm sorry,
How long
the other.
did it take you to get the information? Was it months or?
Oh, no, maybe weeks. The stuff that was already scanned and was already
digital, I had that in no time. The stuff that had to be scanned and processed, we had to kind of get in line for that, but it didn't take very long.
Good.
I think that's really like all they do, in that office, like all day long. So, now the flip side of that was anything prior to 1957 is actually stored at the National Archives. And we got lucky because our imagery for that year was in College Park, Maryland, at a site, at an archive site, rather than Kansas, where a lot of it is held. So we hired a professional archivist researcher to go in and scan all our imagery for us. So what did we get from that? First of all, we got a lot of pictures. We got over 1,000 pictures. And here's kind of an example. I printed one out of like, this is kind of what they look like in their raw form. And a lot of data, almost 360 gigs worth of imagery. So basically, once we get this, we have to turn this into something usable in our GIS system. Because right now, this picture has no idea where it is in the world. So we have to do something called georeferencing, which is basically, we just want to take that picture and we want to put it over present day conditions. We're going to kind of stretch it and twist it and warp it and just pull it. And then you basically kind of put push pins in it. So in this graphic on your screen, there's all those little crosshairs represent places where we identified something in that image that I could still identify in our most recent imagery, which is 2019. And those blow-ups just kind of show you, like, I could see the same barn or shed in that in both images. And then you basically say, well, here, this is where you are in here. This is where you are in this image. So as a result, you get an image that you can overlay over top of present day imagery and other data, not just the imagery. Let's see. So then we have to do something called mosaicing. So when you mosaic something, this is kind of your so the picture on the left shows you, like, now you've got all these pictures. They all know where they are, but now they're all overlapping, and you've still got these frames, and you got this writing and this identification. So then we basically use the software, and we kind of cookie cutter out the heart of the picture, which is usually the best because you get some distortion out on the edges. So we cookie cutter out the middle, find the best part, and then what you're left with on the right is all those things put together like a giant puzzle, and you end up with a countywide seamless image that now we can use in our software. So the results. So now we have imagery that we can directly compare. Multiple years of historic imagery directly compared to present day imagery. So I just got some quick examples. So like this is the 213 301 overpass, which is now, a full-blown overpass with on and off ramps, where before it was a four-way intersection, essentially. And that's incidentally, that shows before, or when there was only one lane of 301. So then we can look at some other things. So this is just, changes in land use over time. This is the Northbrook community, north of Centerville. So you can see what it looked like in 1937 and what it looks like today. We can look at changing shorelines. This is Love Point on an island. See, they've lost quite a bit of real estate. Let's see. Transportation. This is Graysonville. In 1957, it was lots of at-grade intersections. Now we've got divided highway with overpasses. And then this one kind of combines everything. We got changing land uses, shorelines, and transportation. So Stevensville, Bay Bridge, Can Island. That's what it looked like in 1937. No Bay Bridge, no Route 50, no marinas. So it's really interesting to be able to go through and take a look at all these different parts of the county and how they've changed. So how the next thing we want to do is make this available to everybody else. So we have a couple of options, and I'll just give you a really quick demo. So this is the historic imagery viewer where you can kind of swipe through these things. Once that goes away, just find a place like find us, Vinton Street. And then you can go in here and you just pick 2 different years, say 19 and 1957. And then you can just kind of swipe back and forth. And you can pan around and zoom, and you can search, for your address, kind of help locate yourself.
Is this just the county or the towns in this also?
It's the entire county.
Okay.
So let's jump back out to. So there's that one. Incidentally, you can also, if you don't want to do the compare thing, you just pick one individual. Oh, now it's not working. I might have to refresh it for that. But you can just pick one image to look at. So let's see. Oh, I missed one. All right, so this is the comparison tool where there are basically essentially 3 linked frames. So we can do the same thing and just pick some random years. So then once you have those, they all move at the same same scale together. So you can do, so if you don't like the swipe thing, you don't like the overlay, you can do a side-by-side comparison.
Oh.
Zoom to an area where there's not much going on in any year. But you get the idea. We really want people to just be able to explore these things. Also, if you're not familiar with it, our property viewer, we went ahead and dumped them all in there. So now if you, let's just check out this building again.
That's a layer on the property viewer now?
Yes.
Okay.
So now if you go down here in your lower left-hand corner to layers and expand imagery, they're all in here.
Uh-huh.
So this is great because you can look at it over these present day layers. Shows how we can, you can interact with, you can see the parcel lines, present day addresses and center lines. You could dig into these other layers and check out, what they look like compared to the older imagery. Let's see. Oh, so then I just put together just some interesting finds. They're just, I found a ton of really cool stuff. I learned a lot of stuff about the county that I thought I already knew a lot about. But I found, even more things just going through all this imagery over these last couple of years. So this was the drive-in movie theater outside of between Centerville and Churchill. That was 1978. This was the Centerville baseball park. 1937, so that was kind of behind Chesterfield Cemetery here in town. Let's see. I thought this was kind of interesting because of the way the shadows were cast and when they took these pictures. This is actually outside of Centerville too. This is out near by Gunston School. The things you see in the field there are actually like shocks of corn that have been gathered together to be threshed, and then there you see there's kind of some random like big piles, so that's probably where they've already threshed the corn in those fields, and that was what was left over. So I mean, these images are old enough that you can actually see, some really old things. It's Mattapique ferry terminal with a ferry at the dock. It was also 1937. This was a one-room schoolhouse out on Land's End Road in Spaniard's Neck. This is the last one. This is Kent Narrows, Wells Cove. You can see all the small shacks and all the boats, all the watermen and the
Shacks are still there in the early 80s.
Oyster shucking houses.
Look at the number of watermen.
Yeah,
I remember as a kid seeing them.
that's 1957. So the last thing I wanted to show you real quick was how to find all this stuff, since I talked kind of quickly about all this. Easiest way is go to QAC.org. Departments, we are in information technology. Then on the left is GIS and mapping. This takes you to our open data site, where you see links to all these things. And more GIS data. And I think that's it. That's all I got.
Well,
Any
thank you very
questions?
much.
Thank you.
Good stuff, Sam.
Welcome.
Any questions? Okay. You did such a good job, we don't have any questions.
Awesome. Thank you.
Is that something that you did, or is there some state initiative to do this historic?
No, it was just kind of my curiosity, and it
Yeah,
just
it's
kind of grew from there. I learned about all this. My first job was at the Soil Conservation Office down in Cambridge, and one of my jobs was to help people find these in a stack of old images, you know, when they came in. So I knew they were out there, but finding the actual the originals was much better, because the ones in the Soil Conservation Office have been written on and torn and ripped, and
Pretty cool.
so.
Besides the cool factor, Sam, I mean, what other uses does the department, either planning, zoning, or you in GIS, you know, foresee this tool being, you know, an efficient use of county resource? I mean, what do you internally, countywide, do we anticipate this being used for?
Other than just kind of seeing the history of it, it is possible now that we have it, and now the hard part was getting it all digitized and in a coherent fashion. But now there's tons of stuff you can do with this. Like if we wanted to, we could generate like land use data or something like that from these previous years, and then you'd have like this incredible historical record of how land use has evolved. It's already come in handy in terms of like questions about parcel work and you know, maybe why things are where they are now and how things have evolved, when you can be able to go back in time and look at how things came to be.
I can see that very useful for boundary disputes, which come up a lot. You go back in time and you can see where people talk about whether there was a tree here or there was a fence there, and we plowed up to the fence, and then the fence gets moved, and so I can see that would be very helpful for decades-old boundary disputes.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I've already noticed. I mean, actually, that helped with some of the digitizing of it, where I knew we had an accurate parcel data in that area and was trying to help place the imagery. And you could see those fence lines and you could see those corners. But yeah, I don't know. It's part of the reason is just trying to get it out there too. So I'm sure maybe some other people will have some ideas of what we can do with this as well. Cool.
Thanks.
Thank you. Citizen-sponsored text amendments. Applications. Stephanie?
Good morning again. So this first application before you, they're looking to include major and multifamily as part of only a part of a redevelopment, an existing marina in the urban commercial district. So currently in that district, some of the uses that are permitted are hotels, commercial apartments, and first floor commercial apartments. That UC district is generally located in Stevensville, Graysonville area, basically along 301-50 corridor. So in your memo,
in order for me to continue to develop plans and figure out what I want to do, until I know I can do it, I'm kind of stuck. And I don't have any idea how long it's going to take to finish the comp plan, but I'm in the midst of putting together financing and all the other things that you have to do to buy a property like this. And I can't, until I know I can build apartments and condos on this property, I'll have a very difficult time in getting any financing to move ahead.
And do you see the opportunity now, and you don't know what that opportunity will look like
Yeah,
in
the-
2 years?
And all of the studies I've done with Burns International, who's a national firm that does studies, has said that there is a market here today. There are no apartment vacancies on the whole island. Not to mention, these would be, if we built apartments, there are no other apartments anywhere in the Annapolis trade area that are on the water. So that's, but I'm happy to share the studies with you. Both for apartments and condominiums say yes, proceed immediately. And I don't know a year from now what the market's going to look like. It certainly looks good today, but as we all know, that could all end in a few years. So that's sort of the reason for the urgency.
Considered changing the mix of ratio between commercial and residential.
Sure.
Changing the mix so that you could provide less commercial and more residential rather than no commercial and all residential in the structure
Well-
in which the residential use exists.
Oh, you're talking about in regards to the commercial apartment provisions? Well, the
Problem is that the requirements of the mixed use are that that there is more commercial that can be filled, about reducing the requirement for commercial, but maintaining a commercial component.
I mean, I haven't, the commercial apartment provisions, we haven't tried to change that. In other words, you have to build commercial on the first floor. In regards to that would still exist for commercial apartments. What ratio the mixed use would have, we did not put in a specific ratio because we have the marina and it has to be part of a marina redevelopment. But this is going to include commercial and in fact the service boat uses as well. So it's going to continue to have the restaurant while it's going to include some office space as well in this. So it's still going to continue to have the mixed use in this site, and we would defer really to the staff and working with them in regards to a comfort level as to what that would be in terms of how much commercial they would want to see maintained. But there's going to be commercial maintained on the site, and I'll let Walt speak to that a little more. I don't know if you really hit upon it very well.
Well, truly, this is mixed use. It's commercial restaurant, and we intend to reopen the tiki bar that's been closed for 8 years. We plan on, as an example, there's not one security camera on this whole site. So we're going to put in security. But to the point, we'll have restaurants in plural. We will have industrial use, which is the boat repair, and we will have office. So it's truly going to be a mixed use. Amenities are going to be important. We're planning on building a rather large clubhouse for the boat yacht users. But all that's in the works, and as Joe said, we'll address that with staff as we go farther down the road, and we actually land on a plan that we're prepared to move forward with.
I don't know if you'd like to hear from our aviation expert, and I'm not gonna call and ask him to make comments unless you all have questions for him. But that person will work, as I said, with the state and federal and local authorities to make sure that this does comply with not only their rules and regulations, but in terms of what they see as might be problematic as we're developing the plan. And truly, the plan, as you could tell, just looking at what Walt has, goes from the airport in terms of keeping and maintaining much of what already is there. And then, the redevelopment really moves closer to Route 50 because he's been sensitive to that. And that's why I brought in somebody right from the very get-go. I think the final issue, not final, but in terms of the three kind of areas that staff also raised some challenges with, meaning some concerns in their staff report, was utilities, sewer and water, APF, and so on. What I really would like and ask the Planning Commission to focus on is that this site can be built with all the density in terms of units today, but you have to build them over the first floor commercial as to anything this amendment would allow. So we have to go through all that utility planning anyway, regardless of what Walt proposed on the site, whether it be with or without this amendment. So he's going to have to meet APF for schools. He would have to meet, if he did commercial apartments per se, he would have to be able to obtain sewer allocation, which we all know is a very limited commodity, and he understands that. And we would all have to, and he would have to meet road standards. And he's already started those studies so that he's, not behind the 8 ball when he gets to that point. The county has this policy that was adopted back in 2004, that 6804, I think it's called, where it talks about what the 1 million gallon expansion to the plant will be used for, and that you get a copy of it in your staff report. And it's not in the comp plan, and it's not in any zoning ordinances. It's here, and it's in the master water and sewer plan. And just like anybody else, the county will have to deal with that if Walt does get to the point where he requests sewer allocation. I can tell you that for apartments, just straight apartments, the county has not implemented 0468. Apartments, as you know, have been built all over, not all over, but some very nice projects have been done in conjunction with staff and with the developers to do apartments. So that wouldn't even apply to that. He's going to have to deal with that at some point. The county's going to have to deal with that. So what we would ask is that if you can give us a favorable recommendation, we go to the planning commission and go to the county commissioners. If we end up successful on the text amendment, we'll be back before you with a concept plan. We're not going to move right forward to site planning or anything. You'll see the concept plan, and he'll have to deal with, just like everybody else, APF at that time, schools, water, sewer, roads. You'll get more detail on the overpass, on the flyover for the pedestrian bridge, and you'll get much more detail on what Walt is kind of land on in terms of a concept. It could be many more apartments than it is, condominium or for sale units. I mean, that might be the direction that the market leads him in. So with that, we're available to answer questions. I do have, like I said, the airport person on, as well as Tommy Davis, who's been our engineer.
Yeah, I'd like to mention also and introduce
Yes.
Tim Mcgrath, who's my partner on this project. Tim is a local, has lived on Kent Island for many years, and he will be, he's an active partner. I also have a letter from the Beach Club, Deirdre Wilson and Derek James, that we can give you, basically.
Did you get a copy of the letter? Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And I have the traffic group, I think, on board here if you have any traffic questions, and the aviation expert. Thank you.
Yeah, and I
Have
do.
any questions?
I have a
For them?
question, Sharon. As far as, are there any other, when we make these amendments, they seem to have a ripple effect that they'll apply to other pieces of property in the county. Do we know that there are any other pieces of property that this request would potentially apply to, so that we create, something out of scale for what the commission would expect?
Yeah, we've tried to be sensitive to that, particularly since this is, the urban commercial there's many areas of it where you might not want to see this type of redevelopment. As far as both myself and Tom Davis, the engineer, and Tom went through the aerials and looked at the zoning throughout the urban commercial, the answer is no. There is no other area where urban commercial has a marina on it. But the height provisions where we requested to go to 4 stories, they would be universal across the board as we propose them. If the commission has other thoughts on that, we're certainly open to ideas, but the height provision would allow across the board in the urban commercial district the 55-foot with 4 stories limitation. So
You're going up 10 feet.
it's going up 10. Yes, it's going up 10 feet. That's correct. That's correct with the 4-story limitation.
Yeah, and if I might add, forcing anyone to build 45 feet high buildings, 4 stories high, if you could just add up the numbers, and you're trying to do architectural embellishment, you're trying to put the mechanical roof on mechanical equipment on the roof screened. And you'd like to have 10-foot or 11-foot ceilings in some of these. You just can't do it, and you'll end up with a less than desirable architectural and interior finish. So that's the only reason. It's just really very hard to do in 45 feet if you want to do the right kind of job.
Any other questions? Stephanie, did you
Chair,
have
I
something?
have a question, if I may.
Sure.
It seems like you've actually come quite a ways with your planning and thought processes. What kind of provisions, if any, have you made towards workforce housing or affordable housing for the residents of Queen Anne County?
Well, he will have to comply with the workforce housing percentages. And in fact, you and I really probably hadn't even talked about that.
Yeah, I hadn't heard.
Yeah, but there is a workforce housing provision and a percentage for workforce housing. Moderately priced.
Well, if that's a requirement, then I guess I'll have to, that's the first time I've heard it.
Yeah,
So. But whatever the requirements are, we intend to meet them.
Okay, well, I'm leaning towards, are you willing to possibly increase those requirements? You know, if we give, and I understand that the marina in that particular area is in disarray, you know, but if this text amendment is recommended to go forward, what kind of, I guess, and we don't have any assurances at this time, because there's nothing to assure, but, you know, I would like to see maybe an offer, if this moves forward, to grant additional workforce housing or affordable housing units as part of a balancing act to help the residents of Queen Anne County. Additionally, with the concept that you presented to us, I think it looks very nice. However, I'm not in favor or a big fan of, as soon as you come across the bridge, to see those 3 big apartment buildings or condominium buildings or whatever they might be, right there in the front. Hemingway's is already there. It's kind of a landmark, for a lack of better wording, but everyone's been used to that. I just don't know if 3 buildings in your, you know, based off the plan you showed us, may be the most appropriate thing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, that was, Mr. Reese's suggestions are entirely well intentioned, but I'm not sure we want to head down the so-called contract zoning road. I get the point, Jeff, but let's be careful about that.
And I would add and say that we will be back if we're successful with a concept plan, and that would be the time to address Mr. Reese's and I'm sure other comments from everybody and staff about where these buildings will be located, the design, the visual impact. I think that, you know, there's a track record with Mr. Petrie and the Beach Club and the Inn as to, you know, willingness to work with the county to make something very, very attractive as a gateway. And
You could indicate that you won't go to the fallback of payment in lieu of.
yeah, I mean, I need to sit down and go through that with Walt. I mean, I'm a bit remiss because I did not discuss the affordable housing. I just assumed that, you know, I didn't even think about it, to be honest with you. But it exists. It's in the code. So that's what the provisions are. And it's not unusual. It exists in most jurisdictions in Maryland.
I do have one. I believe that this also comes in line, although in a different district, the Kent Narrows, and what Mears Point was trying to do, which, you know, as we seek for consistency, I believe that this brings a little bit more consistency, even though they are in different districts.
Yeah, that's true. The Mayor's Point did receive an amendment from the county to do first, you know, straight apartment buildings in that zone because there was a marina as part of a marina mixed use. So it was very similar.
Any other questions, comments?
If I read the letter correctly, the aviation authority already had a problem with the height issue near the airport. Is that correct? Or was that just, their initial comment? Well,
Yeah, I mean, I read it to say that they had concerns about the height of buildings near the airport, and that and so they raised concern about that and about the increase of the height allowed, but they fell back to, and they attached their gradient in terms of their requirements for gradients of heights moving away from the runway, which is the attachment there. And I can have Mr. Perry speak to it, but we would comply. I mean, there's no.
I understand you comply. I just,
That's right. That is correct.
For reference, do we know the height of current existing buildings in the property?
Well, what's the height of the, do you know, if not Tom Davis, I think.
Air shed is the tallest one, I think.
The boat repair facility is about 37 feet high. It's non-conforming because when they changed they improved the airport. I forget exactly what instrument landing.
It was already built, and then they
Yeah,
approved it
had
very
that not have happened, then that building would not have been approved. But there is a gradient, we have the map, and it shows after you get a certain distance how high you can go.
Upside down wedding cake.
And Mr. Perry's out, he can speak to it. He's looked at all of the proposals, and I believe he believes we can conform and satisfy.
How tall the inn is? That's the.
The inn is, I believe, Tom Davis could answer that. He's online.
Yeah, I believe the inn is 55 feet high.
I have to ask Tom if Tom's on.
Is Tom on there?
Give Tom Davis a second to get on. Tom Davis a second to get on.
I don't have Tom in unless he phone called in.
He did a phone call.
Tom, if you are one of the phone calls, could you please unmute? Other than that, I don't think we have him in here.
Yeah, he is.
Can I ask him one more time?
In the bathroom.
Probably.
Running through the house. No.
Just hello? There he is.
This is Tom Davis. I'm sorry, out of an abundance of caution, I wanted to stay away from y'all. So, can you hear me?
Yeah, Tom, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The commission asked Walt what the height is of the inn, and we weren't quite sure.
Yeah, the permitted height in that district was also the 45 foot, which goes to the midpoint of the roof. So 45 foot was what was allowed and approved on that original site plan.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And if we could have had a little bit more height, probably could have done a lot better. Not that John didn't do a great job, but could have made some more improvements to the roof pitch and things like that.
It is 45 feet, yes.
That's to the midpoint of the roof, not to the peak.
Right. You'd have to look at the definition of how the county ordinance defines height. So depends on if it's a flat roof or a pitch roof.
Have anything further for us? Would you like us to step back or remain here for a
Hey,
minute?
Joe, do you want me to talk about the same things that you've already talked about?
No. Thank you, Tom.
I would just reiterate what Joe said about the property being the only property that's this would be applicable to. The height change would allow a lot more flexibility. We run into issues with architects all the time, and they, as Walt had indicated, you can't really do flexible floor spaces on the first floor because you run into that height issue. So.
Thank you, Tom.
Make it 3 stories.
One option.
Okay. Have any recommendation from the committee? You want to discuss it?
No, admonish me not to talk about this, but I will only say this is another of the famous red-headed Eskimos, which we have to be careful about.
I can't comment to that. No, any text amendment, many of them, we run into the same issue, and we think that that the potential benefits really outweigh doing it out of sequence, and the issues that are very legitimate that you all brought up, including height, you will have that opportunity during a concept plan review to see that in detail. And candidly, if you don't like what's being designed there, that you don't move it forward. You haven't done it in concept plan, and you haven't been challenged on that fact. So I think you have a lot of authority there, and we know that, and we're certainly willing to work with you on that, and staff for that matter, who's been very helpful.
Madam Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to suggest a favorable recommendation of citizen-sponsored text amendment number 21-02, entitled Addition of Major and Minor Multifamily Provisions in the Urban Center District. I suggest this because I know that this is the first of many, many layers of approvals, discussions, and looks at this, and that is my suggestion.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Can I get clarification on, is it urban center or urban commercial, UC? Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was reading.
No,
from
it's written several different ways in the,
Thank you.
in the staff report.
Urban commercial.
Sorry about
It's
that.
okay. It was a direct question and an indirect question both.
I'll suggest for the minutes to amend my suggestion to urban commercial district.
And amend my second.
Any discussion? Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you, board members.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much.
Look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Right, so the second text amendment before you is to incorporate provisions for a self-storage facility with interior access only within the town center district. So if you're looking at history related to this text amendment, there is a couple text amendments previously that would relate. If you're looking at the current code, mini warehouses are a permitted use within the county in certain districts. And the definition of a mini warehouse is very similar to the definition that has been proposed for the self-storage facility. So you can see both of those definitions within the memo. But in 2004, and some of you may remember this if you were on the commission itself, mini warehouses were removed from the town center district. And it specifically states in the code that they are not permitted. And then in 2008, there was a following text amendment that allowed for expansion of those mini warehouses, of existing mini warehouses. but that is a conditional use within that town center. So there is, like I said, history kind of involved with this. What the applicant is proposing also is to include a definition of a self-storage facility within the listing of light industrial uses, which is in the definition section of the code. So you'll see that obviously they're permitting it or listing it as a permitted use, self-storage facility with interior access only. But then if you fall to the definition section, they want to list self-storage facility as a light industrial use. That would also allow for any zoning district that light industrial uses are permitted, that this self-storage facility would also be permitted, because light industrial is listed as a use in some districts, but then mini warehouses or particular other light industrial uses are called out in some particular places. But also they want to define that self-storage facility, and no other light industrial uses kind of have that definition per se, not very many.
That's a little confusing. You're saying that it would still preclude the small units.
Right, so you have your light industrial use, and it lists in the code, it lists out multiple different light industrial uses, and they want to include that within that light industrial definition. So wherever light industrial is permitted throughout the code, it would also allow for that self-storage facility with interior access only to be permitted.
And interior access
Only.
prevents those small units. Okay.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
that's in quotes, I guess, in the permitted use.
Okay.
And I can turn to the applicant then.
Is this covered for all these guys?
Morning again.
Morning.
Joseph Stevens, on behalf of the
Take your
applicant.
mask.
Yep. Joseph Stevens on behalf, thank you, of the applicant, which is Nashville LLC, which is owned by Mr. Schultz, Jody Schultz. Again, to put the amendment into context, the town center district allows, as by right uses, light industrial uses. In an amendment back in 2007 to the code, it singled out 4 separate uses in the light industrial district and said those aren't appropriate in the town center. So 4 uses in the light industrial definition, and said those are not appropriate in the town center. One of those is mini warehouse, mini storage. Another one was, I think, fuel storage, and then a couple of others. So you have that prohibition, and you did an amendment back a couple of years ago. In fact, I was involved with it, where you said, okay, well, if you have a mini warehouse, we'll let you expand up to 50%, and that was actually very helpful to an existing business owner. It was much appreciated. When Mr. Schultz looked at this provision, and he owns property in that district, actually on the north side of Route 50, in the TC district, it was unclear as to whether or not doing a storage facility that's wholly enclosed, and you know what they are. You've seen them. There's one down in Graysonville, and you also have one over in Annapolis as soon as you get over the bridge, and I think those are the only 2 in the area. Was unclear. It was unclear whether or not they could do that, and to make an investment to do and move forward with that, and it was probably, I think our sense was, not permitted as part of the TC district, because it was considered part of the mini warehouse concept. So we tried to separate that out in the amendment and say that a wholly enclosed, interior access only, you've seen them, climate control type of facilities, are permitted in the town center district, and mini warehouses are not. So I want to make that clear. I think the amendment's clear. Mini warehouses are still not permitted in that district, even if you pass this, if the county passed this. And we recognize the town center district, there's a lot of discussion about pedestrian-oriented retail uses and so on and so forth. But the town center district's vast and has areas that are suitable for that type of use and maybe not suitable for that type of use. And the county has recognized that by allowing many fairly intense commercial and light industrial uses by right in that district. And we think that this is no different. The wholly enclosed, we understand the mini warehouse. That's no question about that. But the wholly enclosed, we think, is not inconsistent with many of those uses. And if you go through the definition of light industrial uses and the list of what they include, they are not very different and have the same design challenges, which Mr. Schultz knows he'll have to meet, through plan review. They include wholesale distribution and manufacturing activities are permitted, boat building, bulk materials and machinery storage fully enclosed. So that's part of it. What's not permitted is bulk material and storage yards. Those are part of the the things they took out, the 4 items I talked about. But bulk material and machine storage fully enclosed is. So when you look at uses like that, furniture cleaning, lumber yards, manufacturing facilities, printing plants, truck terminals, they're allowed in the TC district as part of the light industrial gamut. And we think this is probably less intense than a lot of them and easier to design around the design guidelines, comply with the design guidelines you have for the town center district. So that's the context that I looked at it in when Mr. Schultz came to talk to me. I know he's got a broader perspective because he's trying to do something there and he's got a potential partner involved and so on and so forth. So I'll let him speak. But the point that I wanted to make is I think we can, I don't think this is far afield, in fact, fits in with many of the uses that are permitted in that zone.
I mean, Joe laid it out pretty good. I think there was a misconception about why that was taken out originally back in, was it 08?
07, I think.
07, when it was taken out. It wasn't taken out, as kind of what's mentioned in the staff report, that the county was losing mixed-use zone land for opportunities of retail. I mean, it was taken out because it was unsightly. I remember that, and that's the reason, the main reason behind why they were taken out. They didn't want to see these all up and down around town center zoning because they are unsightly, the outside storage units. That's the reason it was taken out. As Joe said, what we're looking to put back in is really no different than a lot of things that can be put there today. I think we submitted some pictures of when I went online and just had printed out a few of many indoor self-storage units across the country that look good and look better than some office buildings and other things that could be built there now. So I hope did you guys get the?
Should be in your memo packet you received.
So that's really what we're looking at doing down there, something that's nice. I mean, we don't want an unsightly building. The light industrial use, I'm not sure I agree with it being confusing as having a definition. In fact, I think there should probably be more definitions of uses in the glossary in the back as it really defines what it is. So we were just trying to make it idiot-proof of what an indoor self-storage unit is. And that's why we added the definition. Light industrial uses, when you read the definition, include wholesale distribution and manufacturing activities generally conducted indoors where nuisances associated with the use, can be hidden. And that's exactly the intent of this. And again, that's why you don't want the outdoor uses because, they're an outside use. So I don't think anything that we're asking for is really outside of the realm of town center zoning. It's like Mr. Petrie. I mean, you guys still have a couple more bites out of the apple when we come before you for site plan approval. It's not like this guarantees that any of this really can be done. I mean, there's design standards, there's a host of other things that have to be met through the process. So, if we're fortunate enough to get this today, we'll be back to you to make sure that whatever we're doing there looks good and fits in the neighborhood and you know, kind of meets the standards and, you know, everything else we're trying to do. I don't know if you have any questions about my partner's here. He could maybe answer some questions if you're interested in maybe the difference in a indoor and outdoor use. You know, there's really not many climate-controlled indoor self-storage facilities. So if you want to store, you know, papers or clothing or furniture or anything that you really don't want outside in the elements, I mean, that's really what you need. And there's one in Queen Anne's. There's a couple in Queen Anne's County. Jason, they have one up in Queenstown. They operate one in Easton. And there's, so there's definitely a need for that when I talk to realtors and ask them what are the things that people are looking for to come to this area, you know, self-storage is always in the top 3 or 4 things that they mention, because a lot of them are downsizing. A lot of them are looking for places to store stuff. A lot of them are working from home now, and they need room to put, you know, professional supplies and such, because they're downsizing out of their offices and such. So I don't know if I have anything else to add.
I think
If
maybe.
you have any questions, or if you have any questions on, you know, my potential partner or Jason, my partner here, be glad to.
Questions?
No, just a comment that I don't know how much experience anyone here has, if any, with storage, but like many people during the pandemic, I was cleaning and clearing, and I looked for a climate control storage space to put some of my more cherished or valuable belongings. And I went to the place in Graysonville, it's near my home, and it's nice. And I said, this is the place I'll trust with my stuff. Well, the young lady at the desk looked at me like I was crazy and said, we don't even have a waiting list anymore. So the closest place I was able to locate was in Easton. But that was too far away for me to have easy access. So I will echo the need. I went through that personally. So.
Any other questions?
Madam Chair, I would question in this case the timing relative to the fact that we're doing the comprehensive plan. And is this something that should be incorporated in that? Is there a particular need that we envision that this should be approved today? Or should we be waiting for the comprehensive plan to be put together?
As I said when I was here just a few minutes ago, it's always a challenge, you know, when you get a comprehensive plan coming up. I don't believe that this has any plan implications, meaning the comp plan.
Yes.
Because we're clarifying that a use is permitted, and I read you the other uses in the district, which are very similar. So it's not like a policy change. It would be my, you know, my position, I guess, that I'm putting forth. It's not as if we're asking to rezone a property, which then has implications with the plan, land use plan. We're not asking for an up in density, which might have implications on the land use plan. This is purely just a zoning amendment, zoning text amendment, and there wouldn't even be any discussion, my estimation would be, in the comp plan for something this shifting in terms of clarification of the use. So I don't see it as a comp plan issue. You know, since the comprehensive rezoning follows the comprehensive plan, you know, the issue before you from a policy standpoint is, do you say wait? You know, our positions, like many others that come in, we talk about that before we even file the amendment, and we say, you know, that could be a long time. He's ready to move now. We think there's a need. It's important. And so we'd ask that you, you know, that you overcome that issue in this instance, but that ultimately is your decision. But we think we put a pretty compelling case on to do that.
And this was
What you did with the last zoning amendment shouldn't have waited for the comp plan. I have a different view on that. This one certainly should. I should point out, so I'm not criticized at any point in the future, myself, my brother, and my 2 sisters own property immediately adjacent to property that this will benefit.
And you did say that this should wait for the comp plan?
No, if the thing next to the airport shouldn't wait, given your recommendation, then this one should certainly.
We're just trying to clarify what you said.
I was a little confused too.
Yeah, this use has already been approved in the district, so I think that, and it was taken out because of, in my strong opinion, the unsightliness of it, and I think they shouldn't be allowed in town center zoning.
You mean the mini warehouse?
The mini.
Yeah.
And we've, you know, again, you'll have a couple more bites out of the apple, and you got to make sure it looks right, as we do, you know. And yeah, we'd ask that we not wait for that, because the fear of the comp plan is we're already a year and a half behind. when the comp plan's approved, that's the beginning. Then you're into a year or more of change in the zoning. So just the day the comp plan's approved is in no way change anything. You got to go through the whole process, arduous process of the zoning changes and all that. So that could be another 2 to 3 years if we don't get COVID-20 or COVID-21 or whatever.
Okay, any other questions from the commission?
Property outside of critical area?
Oh, this piece is in the critical area, and it's
Require growth allocation?
it's limited development, so if he does come in with it, like anything he would do on there, you would have that opportunity too on growth allocation. He'd have to make a compelling case that it should get, whatever. Is it all in the critical area or a portion of it?
Depending on the size, I mean, it's an LDA property, so chances are we'll probably be looking for growth allocation. We'll have to.
That's why, and that's important for me to mention that we own the property immediately next door, which is also partly in the critical area, and so important that I put that on the record.
Yes, and answer your question, Mr. Lee. It is partially, and we'd see through design because the use is permitted in the LDA, right? It's just the impervious cover limitation, lot coverage limitation of 15% in the LDA. That if he needed to increase that beyond that, he'd have to ask for growth allocation to IDA. But because part of the site is not in the critical area, there may be some design solutions. We just don't know yet.
Any other questions? Can I get a recommendation?
I'll make a motion for a favorable recommendation of citizen-sponsored text amendment number 21-03, self-storage facilities in town center district.
Get a second.
Second.
Any discussion? Call for the vote. Any, all in favor?
One moment. Well, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Ms. Jones, I think this is most appropriate for you or anyone else with the knowledge. What are the height restrictions in this zone for a proposed use such as this?
I'd have to look in the code.
4 or 5?
45.
Refer
yes.
to.
45.
And any sense of what your client is planning on that?
I mean, growth allocation would have a lot of impact on that, how big we wanted to go, and trying to work around. There's some non-tidal wetlands in the area, so we're going to have to be very careful how we put it in there. I mean, specifically on that property, it couldn't be a better property for this kind of use.
I think the answer is we'd have to work with the design standards and you all, and it wouldn't exceed 45 because that's the limitation. And
yeah, there's no reason to think it would be any taller than that.
And if you all, from a design standpoint, had concerns with even that height, then we'd have to deal with it while we're here.
And then and my partner really has a lot of impact in that since they operate them. Is it more efficient to have a bigger footprint or to go up with elevators and how people visit and bring stuff in and go in elevators? So I'm not really versed on any of that. So that all comes into play. You do a bigger single story, which takes up more impervious cover, or do you go up 2 or 3 or 4 stories or whatever? So we're really not there yet.
Single story reminds me of getting into the little units.
Yeah, I think you might want some height for,
Right.
We're
you know,
trying
for
not to
architecture.
impact any more impervious cover than we have to. So we'd prefer to go up, but it's just operationally how that works.
I have a suggestion. You might want to look at the mini warehouse performance standards. There are performance standards for that use, particularly that use. It's on page 5 of 7 of that memo. It does talk about, buffer yards. It doesn't talk about height, but I'm not sure if, Tom, that's what you were getting to, as in, buffering that use in any way.
Obviously, it's a high visibility area. Just and the last, applicant, we discussed the height in detail.
Extensively.
Any other comments or questions? Call for the vote now. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
One
Sharon,
opposed?
Tom.
One opposed.
Thank you, board members.
Jeff?
Oh, sorry.
Jeff, which way did you go?
I went aye.
Okay.
Thank you all. Thank you very
you.
much.
Text amendment 21-04. I think we'll take a 5-minute break. 5-minute break.
Good job.
Where's the rest of my committee?
Yeah, no problem. Sure. Let's get started. We're starting your video. I'm unmuting your Zoom. We good, Ted? All right, we're
Good.
ready.
All right, we're back in session for the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting on April the 8th. Good morning. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Absolutely. Thank you. My name's Ryan Showalter, McAllister, Detour, Showalter, and Walker, 100 Northwest Street, Easton,
I'm
Maryland.
going to pull it in so we can hear you.
Happy to do that. And I'm appearing today on behalf of Enel Green Power. Trip Callahan is the applicant, and I'm appearing also on behalf of Trip with respect to this text amendment.
And my name is Gerald Giuliani, and I'm with Enel Green Power. I am the developer on this project.
Want to make your presentation?
Sure.
Is there any staff
I can go.
comments
I can
first,
go
or
through
we're
the
happy to,
proposal, or
whichever order you
You can
prefer?
go through the proposal.
Okay, all right. So the applicants are proposing to allow for the construction of a utility-scale solar arrays outside of what is the mapped utility-scale solar array district. That map can be found in your packet where that district is located. So they're also basically saying that they would comply with the design standards and requirements that all other utility-scale solar array projects within that district basically meet and are required to meet. Also, they are basically saying that a easement would need to be created, a perpetual easement, sorry, in the ag district. It would be, I think it was a third of the acreage that is outside of that utility scale solar array. So let me backtrack, sorry. They're proposing that as long as the array is partially within that district, that utility scale solar array district, that it would be something that would be permitted within the ag and CS district. So it'd be the ag and countryside district is where it's permitted at this time. So let's see. So there is some history, obviously, in the solar history, I guess, but I don't know if all of you are on board for all of that. So basically, I guess the most up-to-date information would be when the utility scale solar array district was added to the county districts. It's an overlay district. Also, it is a conditional use in the ag and CS district, so there are many conditional use standards that are needed to be required, and the lists of those requirements are in your packet if you would like to see them. So I can refer it to Ryan if he has extra comments to add.
Thank you. So we appreciate the opportunity to be up here before you today. The utility scale solar array district is an overlay district that the county created to try to focus solar development within reasonable proximity of the transmission lines that are essential for moving renewable power from the site where it's generated to the grid. And as you may know, the state of Maryland adopted what's called a Renewable Portfolio Standard, or RPS. That's a law the General Assembly created that requires an increasing amount of energy that's utilized in Maryland to come from renewable sources, a portion of which has to come from solar generated facilities. And Maryland, in order to meet the RPS mandates established by the General Assembly, needs a lot of additional solar development between now and 2030. We understand that it has the potential to have, landscape impacts and considerations, and certainly understand the county's desire to focus the location of the solar. Jay's going to walk through the handout that he gave to you in a couple of minutes and help to illustrate that even though the overlay district the county created seems like it includes a lot of area, when you look at what lands are already protected, what lands are forested, what lands are encumbered by environmental constraints, hydric soils, streams, wetlands, et cetera, dramatically reduces the amount of available land within the USSA overlay for development of solar. We have a project that is in a circuit that has capacity for additional solar generation, and that's an important concept for everyone to understand, is that solar can only occur on circuits within the utility grid where there's capacity for injection of power. And it's not as simple as connecting a solar panel to a power line. Certainly when you're talking about residential scale, people can put panels on their house and there's not a significant impact on the grid. But when you have larger generation, larger amounts of electricity, the grid has to have capacity to receive that power. And there's very few circuits remaining in Queen Anne's County that have capacity for utility scale solar development. The circuit outside of Centerville, where the project that drives this text amendment is located, does have capacity. And Enel Green Power has land under lease with Mr. Callahan and others, and has applied to PJM, which is the organization that manages the electrical grid, to inject power into this circuit. PJM allocates capacity on the basis of a queue. So this project has a queue position and is essentially first in line, if you will, to inject power into this portion of the circuit. The challenge is finding the right amount of land to meet the requirements to develop that power and to do it in a way that complies with the county code. The county commissioners identified I guess I would say a preference, if you will, for allowing a certain amount of solar development in the county. And so several years ago, the commissioners adopted a resolution that authorizes payments in lieu of taxes agreements or pilot agreements for the first 2,000 acres of utility scale solar that's developed in the county. So the county essentially developed a policy that said we're willing to accommodate and would like to receive the tax revenue from up to 2,000 acres of solar that will facilitate through a pilot. Beyond that, it could be permitted under the current zoning, but it wouldn't get the same tax treatment. So this project will enable the county to recognize the economic impacts of solar development, the benefits of having generation on the county's grid and not being reliant on coming from elsewhere. And there's a unique twist, and that is that in order to produce this project on this circuit, there's a real struggle in finding land that's available and also within the USSA overlay. And so Mr. Callahan's properties are partially located within the overlay district, but not entirely within the overlay district. And so we've had some initial dialogue with county staff and tried to find a way to provide an opportunity for the county to realize its economic opportunities from solar development, while not suggesting that the county open up, vastly larger areas to solar development, and providing other benefits to the county. And so the other benefit that we propose is in exchange for a temporary land use, the establishment of a solar project that has typically a lifespan of 40 years or less. We're proposing to offset acres that are developed adjacent but outside of the overlay district with a perpetual conservation easement. The staff have a number of questions which we'll walk through responses to, and there may be dialogue today that results in some refinements. We're certainly here to receive your feedback and would like to advance to the county commissioners with a favorable recommendation. So if there are some tweaks that we need to make to clarify points or address points, we're happy to do that. And I think with that introduction, I may turn it over to Jay and then come back and respond to the staff comments and recommendations.
Sorry, gentlemen, do we mind if we move your presentation over to this other laptop? So that way we can see it on the screens in here and the people at home can see it? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think we can do that.
Great.
Is this working? Switch on it. this. Okay. Okay, there we go. We can put it into, what is it, presentation mode?
If you go into slideshow and hit start.
Okay, slideshow and hit start. Where would that be? Is it on file or is it on slide master? Oop. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just doing the same thing you did.
Mm-hmm.
Read that?
All right. Thank you very much, Ryan. I think that, I don't know what I have to say. You said everything. Just kidding. Glad to be here today. Again, my name is Jay Giuliani with Nell Green Power. I'm the project development manager on this project, which we have named Concho Solar Project. Pass on to who is Enel. Enel is essentially the world's largest or close to largest renewable energy company. That's hard to calculate on any given month as the industry is growing. We've been in the business for 20 years, and we have 6 offices in the U.S. with headquarters in Andover and 5 more offices. We're operating in 22 states. We have 650 employees, and I think that what sets us aside or differentiates us within the industry is that we are very focused on being a member of the host communities where we operate, and I'm hoping to show you that today. Essentially, Enel is a owner and operator of renewable energy plants. That means that we develop, build, and operate these plants over their lifespan. We're not just a developer per se. We essentially sell power to utilities and to the private sector. You might recognize some of these names: Google, Starbucks, Ambev. These are all companies that sign offtake agreements with us along with utilities. As I mentioned, we invest in a long-term relationship with our host communities. We make a point to invest in those communities and identify what are the what issues within the community residents have some passion or interest in. We may offer STEM classes. We may help fund local school districts or invest in improving community centers. And we're also very interested in developing and pursuing the whole concept of agrivoltaics, which includes pollinator operations, may include other agricultural operations that can coincide with solar production. Specifically, the project is located to the southeast of Centerville. That polygon on the bottom there is the main acreage that we have secured, and that small polygon is a piece of property where we will build a small substation that will connect directly into the Carville substation. So we won't be tapping into a transmission line, but directly into the substation. This is an 86 megawatt project with a 20 megawatt energy storage system. All the acreage obviously is within Queen Anne's County. We currently have 390 acres participating under long-term agreements. We are hoping to present the conditional use permit application in the third quarter of 2021, and subsequently begin construction first quarter of 2023, and complete that by the end of the year. The construction. This is a general site location map, and there is a key there. Essentially what this map is showing is those 2 green acres, those 2 green polygons at the bottom with hatched, green hatched area. Those are that's the acreage that's actually outside the 2-mile district. And then you will see a green line that progresses up towards that point of interconnection. Those other parcels that are outlined in yellow are participating as easement parcels. This will be an underground easement. This will not be seen from the road or by any of the residents in the area. And then some of these other parcels that are hashed in black are essentially parcels that decided not to do something different with their land right now. They do not want to participate in the project. This land that we have today it covers a good portion of what we need, but we are searching for additional acreage within the 2-mile district. Now, there's a limitation here in that not every single parcel is good for a project like this. A very small amount of acreage doesn't make sense because of the setbacks. We generally need parcels that are somewhat larger that will allow for proper engineering and construction. So while there are parcels in various spots there, some of them are not adequate for what we need. Okay, we've discussed this. I'll mention this again. The current regulations allow for the construction of utility scale solar farms within the 2-mile district. Our amendment, what we're requesting through Trip Callahan, is to allow for utility scale solar on parcels that are outside the 2-mile district, provided that they are partially within that district. This will also require conservation easement within the county as an offsetting benefit. And we want to make a note that this amendment does not allow for the construction of utility scale solar anywhere outside. In fact, obviously the parcel needs to be connected to that 2-mile district to qualify. So we're not opening up the county to solar development in general. We're saying if there's a parcel and there's a landowner who wants to participate and they're partially within that district, let's allow some of that additional acreage to participate.
Go back to the prior slide.
Sure.
Who owns the property, the wooded property that is not in green?
That's all Paul and William Zelinka. That whole parcel is theirs. Are you saying the one that's
acreage that you say that you wish to put solar on that's partially within the 2-mile district? There's a wooded gap between the 2 green.
Yes, that's this right here, right?
This gap.
Oh, well, you have a forested parcel next to just west of Trip Callahan, and then you have this, which is within the Paul Zelenka parcel. So his parcel actually comes all the way down, kind of like a funnel. The great majority of his parcel is actually forested.
Okay, I'm confused. Say that the proposal would be, so long as part of it is in the 2-mile district, have to be in common ownership?
We have a better slide that I think answers your question.
Okay. Yeah.
Skip forward.
We'll get to that. Give you more clarification. Okay, what is the rationale for this request? As Ryan mentioned, there are serious transmission constraints in the county. We've analyzed every transmission segment that exists. There are 12 transmission segments above 69 kV that would be adequate for a larger size project. There's only a single transmission segment that would allow for this project to be built. Other transmission segments that have capacity have already got large-scale projects at further level of development. There's also site suitability constraints. We measured through different layers available through Queen Anne's County and other public sources. Really only about 1/3 of the solar district is suitable for development of solar. And then, of course, there's the issue of landowner participation. So we ran a suitability analysis that shows the Queen Anne's County and its entire 239,000 acres. And then the second image on the right is the utility solar district. 239,000 acres reduces to about 98,000 acres. If we run another layer here and we remove all residential areas, we're losing additional acreage. As you can see more white there. And then if we're avoiding protected areas, which would be easements and everything that's already been in conservation, we've lost significantly more acreage. Finally, if we're avoiding natural resources, wetlands, forested areas, et cetera, you can see how we've got more, actually less suitable areas. And then finally, on this last slide, we have end up with about 30,000 acres that could potentially be developed. And you can see there where our project is located down there where it says Contra Solar. And I'm going to zoom in on this area to explain again the issue. As you can see that, the white area is the 2-mile solar district, and it kind of takes a right turn there. It follows a circuit that goes down to the right. Trip Callahan and Paul Zelinka's property are kind of right down there in that corner. You can see that part of Paul Zelinka's property is within that district, and a very small part of Trip Callahan's property also touches that district. So our reasoning comes from this. We're saying we have these projects, we have these parcels, we have participating landowners that are interested in leasing their land. They are technically within the district to some degree, but the acreage that is prime for what we want to do is just outside that district. So
You're talking this area right here, right?
yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So you're talking like a pinhead of area is okay versus the whole apple is not.
If you turn to the next, if you turn to the next page in your handout or look at the screen, there's a more zoomed in image. So there's two parcels that are, and let me stop and just make sure that we reinforce. We understand this text amendment applies throughout the county, but I thought it was very helpful to provide a context for the discussion rather than to deal with it in the abstract. So this text amendment isn't only focused on this project, but this is what gave rise to the text amendment, so we thought it would be useful to have an illustration to walk through that. So the image that is on the screen, we have two parcels that are relevant to this discussion. One of them, about 45 or 50% of the panels would be in the USSA district. The balance would be outside. The second parcel, which is Mr. Callahan's parcel, the open land, the tillable ground, which is where we would put panels, the vast majority of that is outside of the district. That's correct. The corner,
Really
the
is.
bottom portion
Okay.
is located within the district.
Correct, and then the transmission easement runs up to the substation. We have various definitive, we have landowners that have really declined to participate. They say, no, I'm going to do something else with this land. I'm not really interested in getting involved. And then we have other landowners that have provided easement access, but to date are not interested in leasing land. So I guess what I'm trying to convey with this image is that our anchor acreage is sitting just outside the district, and there aren't that many options within that area to expand this project. We've spoken to essentially everybody, and to date, we don't have a positive on additional acreage. So if we don't have this anchor acreage within the project, then essentially we don't really have a project. We do have a queue position. We've had that. The project's had that since 2018. And so essentially what we're trying to depict here is that it's key that we keep this acreage within the project. Otherwise, we're going to be in trouble. It won't have legs if we can't keep this main acreage intact. Also, to mention here is the fact that we are cognizant that we're asking for an amendment, but that doesn't mean that we're in any way going to ask for any additional exemptions here. We understand that we're going to have robust landscape screening. We're going to meet all the fencing code, signage code. We're going to do the glare and glint analysis, noise studies. We're going to respect the setback from residential and other uses. We'll provide a robust decommissioning plan, and we'll comply with all the standards in 18195S. and also with all applicable local, state, and federal regulations. So this is a specific situation that we're focused on in this text amendment, and we're not trying to focus or request any additional leniency here. Okay, quickly, we'll run through some of the direct economic impact based on other projects and past history. We know that we'll be paying property tax, and we'll be hoping to have a pilot agreement payment. This will generate essentially $200,000 to $300,000 per year, depending on how that works out. We will create 200 to 300 temporary jobs, and all jobs and materials that can be sourced locally will be. Our company is very focused on trying to keep the local community involved into the project, as long as we can do that within our procurement policies. 1 to 3 long-term operation and maintenance jobs would be created, and this project will not create any additional burden on the county infrastructure or school systems. What it will do is be non-invasive and generate revenue for the county that can be used for other purposes. Okay, in summary, the amendment would introduce flexibility to the district to leverage solar suitable land and allow the county to get the county the opportunity to take advantage of significant solar resource. It will allow environmentally friendly solar in exchange for an increase in perpetual land conservation within the county. It will generate significant economic benefits to the county for 30+ years, and we're here to respectfully request your support in passing this amendment.
I'd like to walk through some of the comments and recommendations that were in the staff memo, if there are, but let me first ask, are there questions before we get to that? Okay. So, as Jay noted, the purpose of this request is to try to find a win, find something that is beneficial for the county and also allows a project to progress. And as we've kind of worked through a variety of different alternatives, it became very clear to us that the county has a focus on aesthetics, a focus on protecting the county landscape while accommodating these uses, and that no deviations to any of that should be requested. And we're making it very clear that that's not the case. The 2-mile dimension that was established, it's a numerical value, but it is somewhat arbitrary. I know there was a basis for setting it at 2 miles before, but it could have been 2.25 or 2.5. It's just a dimension. And so what we're seeking is a slight deviation in that dimension with an offsetting benefit that we think advances additional goals of the county. And you have a letter from Jay Falstead that I think makes some of the same points that I'm trying to, is if the county's going to accommodate solar, and if solar could occur on this circuit entirely within the USSA, it would comply with your landscaping and your screening standards, but there wouldn't be benefits beyond the economic benefits for that project. If it occurs on land that's slightly outside of that district, you get all the same benefits and opportunities that exist, all the same screening, but you'd also get an added benefit, which is perpetual conservation, which we think offsets the adjustment to that numerical limitation in your code. There were a series of comments, and I'd like to respond to those, but we understand that this is something that may generate more dialogue. So if there's feedback, if there are refinements that need to be made, we're open to having that dialogue today or after today. The first question was, if the designated location outside of the overlay district is approved, will the required preserved lands have to be on site? And our proposal is no. It's my belief that it may be more beneficial from an ecological or a landscape perspective to have preserved lands located in close proximity to other preserved lands. And so, we're open to the county's directions and preference. If the county has a preference that preserved acreage be on the same parcel as the solar, we're not opposed to that, but I think there may be greater benefit to the community and the landscape if there's more flexibility to cluster that in areas where you have other MET or other protections that exist. The second question, I have a similar response. If the subject property does not have enough remaining acreage to supply the preserved land, if the landowner has additional properties, will they be required to place that land in common ownership and preservation? We're not opposed to that requirement. And certainly if we have a relationship with a landowner who has additional land, they might be a great prospect for preserving some of their additional land. But in my mind, having the flexibility to get conservation in an area that makes the most sense is more important than linking it to common ownership. How many development rights are retired compared to the preserved land? The intent behind this easement, and if the language needs to be revised to make it clear, is that this be new conservation, that the county get a net conservation benefit in exchange for this flexibility. So the conservation easement requirement should only be satisfied from lands that are not otherwise preserved. So something subject to a transfer of development rights, something that's got a non-contiguous development right agreement in place, land that has some other forest conservation or conservation easement is not eligible. We're talking about protecting land that's not encumbered with additional protections. In our drafting, we propose that the preservation occur within the ag zoning district. We're ambivalent and look to the county for its preferences. If the county would like to see that preservation in either the ag or the countryside or has some other direction, we'll follow the county's preference. So if you have land that is developed for solar in one district and you're conserving land in a different district, obviously the development rights calculations may vary, which is why I thought it would be best to focus on acreage. The next question is, if the landowner of the subject property does not have sufficient land to supply the preserved acreage, what method will be used to preserve required land on another property? And our response is that we're happy to use the conservation instrument or form that's preferred by the county. So if the county would like to use an agreement along your transfer of development rights or open space forms that the planning staff and Chris are comfortable with and use in other contexts, that's absolutely fine. To be honest, my initial thinking was that we might use the state conservation easement form that is fairly standardized between Maryland Environmental Trust and the Maryland Ag Lands Preservation Foundation. But we're agnostic, so we'll follow the county's direction. The intent is it's a perpetual conservation easement, and that it run either for the benefit of the county or for the benefit of MET or MALF or some other organization that regularly holds conservation easements.
Ryan, I've never known you to be either ambivalent or agnostic before.
We understand we're making a request, and we'd like to find a way that we address the county's questions and concerns. And to be honest, we have to pay for perpetual preservation. The form that's established really doesn't matter to us. What criteria will be used for the preserved lands? Soil types, contiguous acreage, woodland or tillable acres, et cetera. And again, as I said before, the intent is to give the county a conservation benefit. And as drafted, the reference was to agricultural land. So our expectation is if you're taking tillable ground out of production temporarily for solar, we're preserving tillable ground for the future, not buying an easement over woodland in exchange for using the tillable ground. I'll get to a recommendation below, but the county noted some soil preferences that MALF uses. We're happy to follow the county's direction and preferences for how the conservation land is prioritized or identified. Will the same soil criteria used in non-contiguous development be applied for the required preserved lands for solar? Again, as I said, we're happy to follow the county's preferences or directions in that regard. Who will prepare the legal documents for preserved lands and recording the document in the land records, and who pays the legal fees? It's our intentions and expectations that this is entirely on the applicant. So just like the applicant's required to produce a landscape plan and install landscaping that meets your standards, the applicant's required to do all of this. The applicant would be responsible for negotiating and purchasing the conservation easements, for preparing the legal documents to the satisfaction of the county, and for all of the cost of recording those, including any transfer tax or recordation fees. Does the total area of the solar project count as required acreage for preservation? I think this probably can be clarified in the draft amendment. The draft amendment refers to the improvements associated with the project. It's our intention that basically everything inside of the fence, solar panels, roads, inverters, everything inside of the fence be considered as the developed area. Land that's outside of the fence that is in a buffer or protected for forest conservation purposes associated with that site plan would not count as acreage that is improved or developed for solar. And then the staff have a series of recommendations. The first is that all conditional use standards will be required. We're happy to comply with that. The second, notes that the word partial is subjective and it may be beneficial to indicate a percentage or an acreage amount. I think that the challenge there is, percentages are based on the overall size of a parcel. And I think in my mind, having a property that is at least partially located within the district is sufficient. If you had a 1,000-acre parcel, you could have 150 acres and be at 15%. If you had a 10-acre parcel that was willing to lease and be part of the project, and just outside of it, that 15% might limit you to a very small amount. If the county was focused on a different way to address that, to make sure that the extension beyond the district was not overly extensive, if there's a very long linear parcel, for example, maybe a different way to do it is to set an additional buffer, set a dimension, an additional setback, if you will, beyond the 2-mile limit to constrain that. The next recommendation is that the proposed amendment comply with all the conditional use standards and that the amendment be revised to change the word design to conditional use to make it clear. We're happy to support that clarification of this amendment. And so this would provide that any solar development outside the USSA shall comply with all conditional use standards and requirements applicable inside the USSA. The next comment, or the following comments all relate to the conservation easement consideration. And the first is that our amendment proposed the protection only within the ag district. The applicant should clarify if the easement must be located in the ag district, whether the array is proposed in the countryside or the ag district. Again, the thinking behind the proposal was that there may be more benefit to the county in preserving land in the agricultural district than in the countryside district. But we're happy to do whatever the county directs. If you want the acreage to match the underlying zoning, that's fine. If you want to provide flexibility in both districts, that opens up more land for potential protection. And we're happy to do whatever the county prefers. I think I addressed the next recommendation is to clarify whether the easement must be located on the same parcel, adjacent, or anywhere throughout the county. I think there may be benefits to providing greater flexibility and not requiring it on the same parcel, but we're open to working with the county to address that. The applicant indicated that the rate of conserving agricultural land is equal to 1/3 of an acre for every acre of land located outside of the district. Staff previously suggested a rate of 1 acre per 1 acre. Substantiate the ratio. And the logic behind our proposal is that this use is a temporary use. These facilities have essentially a 30 to 40 year lifespan, and we're trading that for conservation protection in perpetuity. And so our logic is that in exchange for that, essentially 40-year term, we will provide perpetual preservation. Doing so at a ratio of less than 1 to 1 is what we propose. I'm not going to read the whole next recommendation. I'll just summarize it to say it references MALF criteria for prioritizing protection, looking at soil types, and we have no objection. We're happy to utilize that criteria or other priorities that the county establishes. And then the last bullet notes that the proposed language states the conservation easement may partially encumber a property proposed for solar development. It should clarify where the other portion of the easement could be located. The only reason it has that may language in the amendment, you have a provision that talks about prohibiting solar on lands that are protected. And so the thinking is we want to have the flexibility to preserve appropriate lands within the property boundary that is proposed for this development, but not be required to that. So our belief is providing flexibility to preserve land adjacent to other conserved lands is more important than the artificial boundaries of an existing parcel or of parcels in common ownership. And then the last, I don't think is really a recommendation as much as it was just a staff reference to the comprehensive plan. And I think it's important to note that we believe this allows the county to implement multiple objectives. You know, one of your objectives is to develop affordable, reliable, and state-of-the-art infrastructure that meet the demands of the county's population. Solar, especially distributed generation that injects power sources onto the grid within the county rather than relying on outside solar generation is a benefit. This also allows the county an opportunity to protect and preserve agricultural land through deed restrictions in a manner that you wouldn't get if it was on acreage just happened to be inside of that 2-mile limit.
How many houses are involved?
I don't think either of these parcels. Do you mean in the vicinity of the project? I don't know the answer as I sit here today. We're happy to look at that and provide that information. It's if we go back and you pull up that one slide, if you look at the aerial photo, it is in an area that does not have significant subdivisions or residential development around it. There are some homes, that use those roads, but one of the first siting factors, one of the first carve-outs, if you will, as we went through the district, was to exclude areas that have significant areas, concentrations of residential development. There's no portion of the county where there's no house, obviously, but the goal is to keep it in an area that minimizes any potential conflict.
I believe that on the arrays that we have proposed now, there's one.
Just one house? And they're on board, or they're happy with it, or no?
They're not participating within the project. We have not approached them yet. But going back to what we mentioned about screening and being sensitive to, the whole aesthetics of the countryside, yes, we would definitely approach them, speak to them, and figure out how we can address their concerns. If that means maybe more robust setbacks or screenings or whatever it might take to satisfy them. I mean, within reason.
Right.
And this, remember, this is driven by a project, but it applies throughout the county. So your normal landscaping and screening standards apply. You'll review and make recommendations before a conditional use application goes to the Board of Appeals, and then also have determination with respect to site plan.
So the property that we're talking about that initiated this text amendment, how many acres of that is usable for what you need, and how much megawatts does it give?
Well, the exact number, I think there's roughly 290 acres there. But that's not taking into account setbacks and
I'm talking about
wetlands.
what is legally okay to use right now.
So within the district now, if we go back.
On that, the one that caused this text amendment.
So right now, the two parcels, if you look at your screen, the two parcels that we're dealing with.
How much is in the dark green, the solid green? How many megawatts can you get out of that? Versus how many you're asking for?
Could I speak just a bit? I'm Trip Callahan. I'm the one that's
Well,
the applicant here.
I'm not sure he knows
And
again.
on my farm,
You have to get to a microphone though, sir.
on my farm, the bigger block there, there's roughly 300.
Can you get to the microphone?
There's roughly 325 acres, and there's roughly 254 acres tillable. And in dealing with Open Roads Renewables, who's the one I made the lease with originally. Jay's company's only, they purchased the lease a few months ago. Open Roads made an estimate that they probably would be able to use 240 acres of the 254 when you take off the buffers and all that type of thing.
But how much in the
All
area?
of those are outside the 2 mile district. All 240 acres that he's talking about
Right.
are outside
Okay.
the district. And I don't know about the other piece of property. I don't know how many acres we're talking about.
The Zelenkas is roughly 200 acres. And
The
from
open
way-
area is about 150, and I believe 90 are outside of the zone.
Have any questions, comments from the commission?
So all of your existing is outside the 2 mile district?
What's that?
All of your property is outside of the 2 mile
No,
district?
not all of it. There's a little section of it, which is woodland.
Okay,
A little section of woodland that is within the 2 miles.
but the proposed area where you're going to build this is outside?
All the area, the area on the far right side, far right side,
All the panels will be outside the district.
all the
That's what I'm
panels
asking,
be
yes.
outside the district. Right.
I'll make a couple comments, in as much as I think from staff, I think I'm the only one that was here when this was done, back in 2016 and 17. Well, I mean staff, not the commissioners. Let me say two things. First, the 2 mile, the width of the district at 2 miles, or 1 mile on each side of the transmission lines was not arbitrary. It was picked in consultation with a variety of sources, including industry sources, who made it very clear to us that being more than a mile away from a transmission line essentially rendered projects economically unfeasible. Maybe that's not the case now. Maybe something has changed since then. I see this easement that's snaking all over the countryside to get to the substation that they're going to build. Maybe that's something new that didn't exist back in the day. Maybe it's become more economically viable. But to suggest, as Ryan did, that this was an arbitrary width, it's not so. Number two, I appreciate NCEL's efforts here at this level, rather than ignoring us and simply go into the Public Service Commission, which they could do, and convince or attempt to convince the Public Service Commission to approve the CPCN application over the what would be the objections of the county, because it's not permitted by the zoning code. So I appreciate the fact that they're willing, that they're here at trying to convince you and the county commissioners to amend the zoning code so we don't have that fight in Baltimore, and I appreciate that. We may still have the fight depending on what happens with this amendment, but they're trying, which I appreciate. And the conservation easement set aside was a suggestion that we made, the staff made, and myself, in conversations with Ryan Showalter before this was submitted, and we didn't say we would necessarily endorse it, but that would be a good idea if they wanted to pursue this amendment.
Bruce, could you ask Donna Landis-Smith for her comments?
Yeah, I'm fine. Can you hear me?
Project?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Evidently she can't hear us. Can you hear us, Donna?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Go right ahead.
All right. Can you give me your comments on your thoughts on this project and identify what you do for the county?
I work at the Soil Conservation Office and I administer the land preservation programs, the MOUth program, Rural Legacy, and I also have input on the Maryland Environmental Trust easements. And I had spoken with Stephanie Jones in length about this particular text amendment. And we as a organization here at the Soil Conservation Office do not have a favorable or unfavorable recommendation. Myself, speaking as far as the land preservation program, I think this is a wonderful opportunity if these solar projects are placed on a property to be able to utilize the preservation of other properties. And I had mentioned that we need to follow basically the same criteria that we have in place with MOUth or Rural Legacy or the non-contiguous development, because we want to, as the gentleman said, preserve the best farmland. We don't want it to be non-tidal wetlands or the lesser desirable properties, with wetlands in the woods. We would prefer it to be, a prime agricultural property. And we have many, many properties on a list waiting for that funding. And this may be a great source to be able to preserve some of those properties. I was looking at the aerial map while you were speaking in that. There's only 2 houses directly across from the project where Mr. Callahan lives, and 4 adjoining properties are already in preservation that adjoin that property. So it would be a win-win situation.
Okay. We have any comments, any questions from the commission?
I would also like to point out that the difficulties that the solar developers are having with locating lands is not, best I can tell, not the result of the 2-mile swath down the middle of the county. It's that they can't find enough property owners in that 2-mile swath to participate with them. And that's not a problem with the zoning. I'm not encouraging or discouraging a recommendation here because, as I indicated, I'm pleased that their applicant is working with the county rather than ignoring the county and shoving something down our throats at the Public Service Commission. We can't help it if they can't find willing farmers.
So can I respond to that? It's true that
them, not to me.
I'm sorry. There are not that many parcels that are really adequate for solar. I mean, there may be within, if we were to take the point of interconnection and we were to go out 1 mile in either direction, you're going to find all these constraints that we spoke of, and there may be parcels up there that look like they're appropriate, but many times they are smaller parcels or parcels that would require such a setback that they don't make sense to build on. So we generally need to find larger parcels because we take into account the setbacks, we take into account setbacks from any ag ditches or wetlands or things of that nature. We have to set back from trees because of the shade. And then all of a sudden a parcel that seemed like it was wonderful is really so-so. So it's, and now if we go to a smaller parcel that may be only 30 acres or 40 acres, we end up with really very little usable acreage. So it's true. There is land within the 2-mile district, but we went through those filters and tried to demonstrate that a lot of that land really isn't appropriate or it can't be used. But then there's further constraints on that, which we didn't really go through. And one is lot size, et cetera, or it may be, homes in the area. There may be only 3 or 4 homes in the area that could be affected, but we would generally be sensitive to that. And we're going to make every effort within the design and the site plan and within the screening to make sure that we're not imposing on the community, but instead our interest is to be a long-term community member here and contribute.
And I didn't mean to, arbitrary is probably the wrong word. I understand there was thought behind the district. I don't think when that was done, the detailed constraints analysis and siting analysis was prepared. It may have been done at some level, but when you really work through that and then spend hundreds of hours and letters, reaching out, you get to a place that's much more constrained than what that original 2-mile swath was. So what we're trying to do is find a way to have a project succeed where there is capacity in the county and provide the county with a benefit. And we think doing it in a way away from residences where it's well screened, having solar on larger contiguous footprints instead of distributed within that 2-mile zone on a bunch of 30 and 40 and 50 acre parcels has less of a aesthetic and landscape impact anyway. And so we really think this is a win. But we're obviously here for your feedback. And if you're in a position where you're not fully comfortable to make a recommendation today, we'd much rather have the opportunity to address comments or questions and come back in May than leave with a negative recommendation today.
I have one more editorial remark, which is not going to be solved whatever happens with this amendment. For many years, we've struggled with well, not anymore given the septic bill, but when we used to struggle with the design appearance of major subdivisions in the ag district that were driven by PERC. And you get these weird configurations of lots chasing PERC tests. In some regards, this problem is similar, because what the solar developers are chasing is capacity in the system and substation.
From our experience, we're getting more people providing comments than we think we would have in a face-to-face situation, and they are probably a different component of the county, so we're really excited to be pulling in that additional information. So we have, let's see, I think between our people who have signed up for our listserv as well as organizations that we've added, our own contact list is well over 500 people, and that also includes a number of county staff at various levels, so that helps to address some of the issues from that were mentioned last time about putting out additional information to staff members, organizations, et cetera. The input that we have been receiving through both the virtual meetings, comments to our questions of the week, through the community survey that was undertaken, and then comments that are just coming in through the project website, have been fairly consistent. There are of course a few topic areas where there are differing opinions, but overall, I would say the input is pretty consistent, which is great to see. And then just to highlight, these visioning workshops that we completed several weeks ago, and the special topic workshops are the two of the main pieces and opportunities for citizens, residents, and other stakeholders to participate, and for the Planning Commission and county commissioners to listen to the input from the public. And then we are incorporating that information into our drafts, bringing that to you and to the technical committees that we are having with county staff. And this forum, these workshops are really that good opportunity for you as the Planning Commission to provide us any comments or questions that you have either on information received during those other workshops or on the draft chapters. And then, of course, we will update the chapters and any information based on all of those comments, and revise drafts for that final draft for you all to recommend to the county commissioners. And then at that point, they will review the draft themselves and make the vote on adoption. So that will, of course, take place a little later on in this process. And again, to continue this update very briefly, again, over 500 contacts just on our side. We've had over 1,100 people, individual people that are using the project website. So that's a fantastic number. They've had over 2,000 sessions and over 5,000 page views. So those are, we're really excited by that level of interest and involvement in this project. As you can see with the questions of the week, again, it's not any kind of a statistically valid survey, but just, getting those little pieces of information, extra pieces of information. And with those, again, anywhere from about 15 to 30 responses, depending on the specific topic area. These are not questions where we are focusing any decisions or anything like that, but just trying to provide a little bit of additional insight into the various areas within the plan. And then just specifically for the two topics that we are discussing today, which would be housing and the historic and cultural resources section, this question that was part of those questions of the week asked what you think the county's priorities should be related to the provision of housing. So the responses here that we heard were that there should be a focus on walkable and bikeable communities. We should encourage more workforce housing or housing for moderate income residents and families, promoting affordable housing opportunities, particularly for low income residents and families, and then offering more senior and assisted living opportunities. When we look at the question regarding the types of historic properties that the respondents were most interested in seeing preserved, the highest number were the traditional cultural landscapes, farming and ranching, et cetera. And then we went to locally owned historic public buildings, followed by mining and industrial sites. So very interesting diversity of high priorities with those responses. And then there was the community survey that was completed back in late 2019, or yes, 2019, early 2020. And those topics that were focused on housing included how important is housing to quality of life. So as you can see in that first chart, looking at affordable housing in particular, close to 90% of people thought that affordable housing was either important or very important. So that really speaks volumes to that topic. And then also looking at housing affordability, again, about 85% thought that affordable housing was very important to future development efforts. The question was asked about the appropriate role for various county officials related to different topic areas, and about 75% of people thought that residential housing should be either encouraged or remain neutral, and then while about a third of respondents felt that vacation homes should be discouraged versus other types of housing. And then another question was about the how housing costs, the cost of living, and the sense of community has been impacted by the development that we've seen over the last 10 years or so. So as you can see here, there's been much more of a negative impact, at least the perception from respondents, on the cost of housing as well as the cost of living. And the sense of community is positioned a little bit better, with about 50% of people saying that there's been positive or very positive, but there's still that other 50% who are either neutral or feel that the sense of community has been negatively impacted. So those are all sort of important things for us to keep in mind as we move through this process, just the perception of those various issues. This question was pulled from the draft housing study, so we're fortunate that these two processes are being undertaken at the same time, so we can benefit from this additional, more specialized look at housing. So one of the questions their survey asked was, what kind of support is there for what was called less expensive types of housing? And the respondents either strongly supported, or at least supported with some kind of conditions, the various housing types here, from duplexes and townhouses to cottage homes or tiny houses in a backyard, and even to small apartment buildings, or those with fewer than 20 units, where we really started to see people objecting either somewhat or strongly was the provision of those larger apartment buildings or over 20 units. And then looking at some of those same questions about when we talk about historic resources, quality of life, both cultural activities and diversity all ranked important and very important, and the historic preservation and availability of cultural activities also rated very highly in relation to how important they are to future development in the county. As I mentioned, we have had a few additional special topic workshops. Our first one focused on housing, and here we heard that a number of available lots, the MPDU program, and luxury housing were really assets within the county, but there was, again, that real need for affordable housing, entry-level housing, multifamily units, and then next up housing, which is the type of housing that is present for those that are moving out of being homeless. So what is the step between, say, a homeless shelter and a traditional living situation? So some of the goals and actions that our participants wanted to see were a more solid foundation for a homeless shelter. Sure, as you know, the one shelter that the county does have is sort of at the is very dependent on the property owner's willingness to have rooms within the church serve as that shelter. So it's, could be a somewhat tenable situation should that desire change. Also, some goals were if there were ways to simplify land use policies, make sure that any infrastructure that is needed is in place either prior to housing being developed or in concert with, and then making sure that there is more of that affordable workforce or attainable housing. Our Historic and Cultural Resources workshop really focused on the assets, the historic sites within the county, which they're great historic assets here, and everyone really appreciates those, as well as the working waterfronts that really speak so much to the county's history. Respondents identified additional needs related to tourism that would really bring these items to the forefront of the county. Thought there was more of an appreciation for the county's heritage, and making sure that the historic properties are documented and accessible, and that there was equity in terms of what resources are being preserved. So the goals and actions that were identified were either more studies on the breadth of the properties that are historic within the county, an endeavor to support more historic trades, whether that is through training or workforce development, and then protection of archaeological resources, as well as looking into a digital presence that would inform, broaden the information that is available to the public.
Sorry, Lauren, would you go back one just before
sure
you leave
can.
that? Question about that, the right-hand side, what resources are most important? Is that significant public buildings? Not significant public and then?
Yes, that
buildings?
it looks like
And
it
can you help me
split the column there.
understand, at the risk of sounding odd, why is women listed there?
So it's not necessarily not necessarily a structure, but structures that would have been important to women's history within the county, and also just recognizing the important roles that that women or particular women have played. And I don't know, if Elizabeth, if you wanted to, if there's anything you wanted to add.
I'm trying to think of an exact, the year the woman was Talking has about just Harriet ended.
It's
Tubman
like Harriet Tubman
Yeah.
or historical figures,
Right.
not just
Why
women in
not?
general.
Well, and actually,
Why women?
I don't understand that. I like historical people or
I just wanted to get some context of what that means.
It maybe more appropriately would be historical women figures within the county's history.
About historical figures. Yes.
That is well. I mean,
let's
these
drop
are
the female or the woman.
and you know, these are just the different specific topic areas that were brought up during this workshop. So again, we also have African American history and figures, as well as Native American. So sort of in that same vein.
So they could all come under historical figures.
Absolutely, and people want more stories. There's a story down in Ocean City that I learned a long time ago that women founded a bank down there, it's still in action, and they were the wives of the watermen, and so they needed financial resources. So finding stories like that talk about how you built the community and looking for it everywhere, not just simply in the usual suspect places. And I think everybody's just asking for more stories now. It's been interesting to watch.
But can we switch it to historical
It
figures?
is Queen Anne's, right? I mean, I get the nod, but just I wanted some context of what that meant, other than possibly just one out of the 29 people said women, right? I don't want to obviously belittle the answer. I just wanted to get what that means to you as someone who heard that and then obviously listed it here. Thanks.
So with that, if there are no other questions on the input that we heard so far, we used that as well as the information from our technical committee meetings and conversations with various county staff and other stakeholders to develop the chapters. So the first chapter that we're going to be discussing is housing. And here, similarly to the rest of the chapters, there are the same sort of standard components, the vision, key issues and themes, guiding principles, and legislation. And then again, sort of an overview of that public input related to this topic. Particularly for housing, we then get into the inventory of the various housing resources, a discussion of affordable and workforce housing, sort of what's in the pipeline as far as housing goes and what are the needs of the county, discussed various organizations and resources that are present or work within the county, an overview of some best practices or tools and techniques, and then we go into the goals, strategies, and actions. And I just sort of at the outset of this conversation, we just wanted to clarify when we talk about affordable housing in this particular context, we were discussing housing that is no more than 30% of a person's income. So that obviously varies depending on what a household's income level is. But that's sort of that standard that is used across the board when discussing affordable housing in general. Digging a little deeper into the specific sections, we get more into the levels of affordability. So for those that make under the median income and how far under, and so as we get to those lower income levels, that affordability becomes even more critical. For this update, in addition to that, the input that we heard, we used information from the last census, the most recent American Community Survey data, a somewhat recent affordable housing assessment, and the data roundup for child and family well-being results that also talked to housing needs for students and children within the county. And then again, we were fortunate enough to be able to pull information from the draft housing study into this discussion. When we were creating this draft and hearing input, resoundingly, the item that continued to come up was affordable housing, attainable housing, missing middle, and workforce housing, and those are really all related. When we talk about workforce housing, that is making sure that there's housing available for the community's firefighters and nurses and teachers, making sure that there is housing available for those young adults who may be children of the community, but once they get to the age where they are looking for their first home, that entry-level home, is there an opportunity for them to find housing within the county, or do they have to live outside the county and commute in for work experience, or is that more of a balanced connection? So that also ties in with another conversation, which was on diversifying the housing base. So not solely promoting the traditional single-family homes or the larger homes that are on multiple acres, but then also looking at some of those other opportunities, such as either apartments or duplexes, townhouses, the cottage homes, so really that broad range. And the conversation that we heard was that it's very difficult to find even rental housing availability within the county, but particularly rental housing that is in an affordable at an affordable price point. And if there were a broader diversity of housing options available, it may balance things out a little bit more. So if there's more supply, the cost of the existing housing may come down, which would then in turn allow for increasing affordability and housing options for those that do not have as much income to put toward their housing situation. Another concern or discussion that was held was regarding aging in place. So more and more, we're seeing that people don't want to have to move out of their community as they hit different age brackets. Is there an opportunity for someone to who either graduated high school or college and is looking for their first home or that entry level housing to then move throughout the housing spectrum to say a more traditional single family unit, and then as people retire, wanting to move into smaller units that may not have as much upkeep, and then beyond sort of that retirement phase, when you get to thinking about housing that is appropriate for the elderly, is that opportunity available? So not only can existing houses be renovated or built so that they are accessible should people need wheelchairs or help getting around, or it's not as feasible for them to be using stairs all the time, wider doorways and things like that, to are there opportunities for either assisted living or nursing homes or things like that within the community, so that people don't have to leave the county which they consider to be their home. So those were, those were really tied together as a big piece of the discussion of housing needs, and to help to see some of those things be answered, or to help reach some of those desires. There was a discussion about how can we really do that? How can we go beyond just traditional market housing to get some of these additional housing components here? And that was, looking at a variety of bonuses and incentives, and are they appropriate and in what format? And that could be anywhere from looking at some increased density availabilities to, is there an opportunity to shave off some of the fees or costs associated with affordable housing development. So that discussion occurs within this chapter, as well as the housing study itself. Some of those same discussions were held regarding the moderately priced dwelling units and that program, and thoughts about how that could be more widely used. And then we also had, as I mentioned, there was a discussion of the homeless situation within the county, and that's one area where we didn't speak to it quite as much, and we would like to provide some additional information, but just that the tenuous nature of the shelter, and we had some statistics that there were, I think this past year when COVID was occurring, what has traditionally been a seasonal shelter, more in the winter months, has became a full-time shelter.
Yep.
And there have been close to 100 people making use of that over this year. And over 30 of those were, or close to 40, I believe, were actually children. So, on
a daily basis?
Not on a daily basis, but throughout that process, and there are definitely some overlap there. I believe when I spoke to the director for Haven Ministries, who facilitates the shelter, when they are in their traditional shelter location, I believe that they are limited to between 10 and 15 people at a time while they are utilizing the church. With the COVID situation, because those numbers increased, they actually went to a hotel and were able to work with them for a larger space due to the need for it. But had they not had that opportunity available, they wouldn't have been able to help nearly as many community members as they did. And they do work with community members from the county, so there aren't people coming in from those from the neighboring counties to utilize those services. I guess with that, did you have any questions or comments on the housing component of the plan so far?
They all seem fairly common to almost every jurisdiction. I mean, the homeless shelter issue, the affordable housing for the working, people. I mean, it's nothing magical. The question is solutions, and seeing what best practices in a given jurisdiction that's working. There are now companies on the stock exchange that are going in and buying entire communities and turning them into rental units in order to create affordable housing for the workforce. I mean, it's a big issue, and most of it comes down to land use and access to water and sewer and putting everything else in place.
Where do we go from here?
Well, we are still incorporating some of the comments that we've heard from staff members, and are still expecting some additional comments to come in on this chapter itself. And the housing study is due to be finalized within the not too distant future. So again, any changes between the draft and that version.
You're still on schedule?
For our work? Yes. We are on schedule with what we've outlined. We have not yet set dates for any of the sort of the adoption phase, which is where this commission would recommend to the county commissioners the plan, and then have them begin their review and the public hearings, et cetera, associated with that. We have some tentative dates that are penciled into the schedule, which would really have the draft presentation of the full plan happening in probably in late July, early October, and then taking the process through. Our schedule incorporates a few additional meetings that haven't been specifically identified the need for them. So whether there's a workshop with an additional workshop here, or that the commissioners wanted an additional workshops, but we are still on schedule to wrap up everything as far as the adoption process by November, and then it would just be a matter of finalizing, any just the final deliverables.
But your draft presentation will be in July, not because you went July, October.
After we have the presentation, there's the sort of that period, the official public comment period.
But you still have the draft presentation for July, right?
It is tentatively slated for July, yes.
Okay, because the way you said it, it was like you went July, October. You're going to be there somewhere in that time.
Well, so
we see July, not October.
We have yes, sorry about that I was not more clear. We are right now looking at having that draft presentation in tentatively in late July, and then opening up a longer period of official public comment on that draft. And then our next scheduled meeting would then be potentially in early to mid-October. So that gap is really that official public comment period that's required by the state and those regulations, as well as that gives the opportunity to provide the plan to the state agencies for their review through their required processes and get those responses back as well.
Good. Any questions from the commission? Or comments? No, seems like you're doing a good job.
Thank you. It's always very nice to hear. Appreciate that. So then we will move on to our discussion of the Historic and Cultural Resources chapter. Here again, we focused on some of those same standard items. And then when we look into the specifics related to this chapter and topic, there's a discussion on the history of the county itself, benefits of historic preservation, both tangible and economic, as well as those sort of social benefits that we see, a discussion of the various and broad range of historic and cultural resources that are present here in the county, the different organizations that work toward preservation, some best practices and tools and techniques that may be considered or are examples of things that are being done elsewhere, and then again looking at the various strategies and actions that are some of them are sort of carried over from the last plan that had not been accomplished. Others are more specific and have come out of the various input that we've heard through our public discussion processes so far. And with that, since we have the expert with us, I'm going to turn this over to Elizabeth to sort of walk you through those key discussion issues that we heard related to the historic and cultural resources. So with that, turn it over to you.
I'd like to start with just a note about the benefits that are discussed in this, and there are 4 different categories, and one was pretty interesting to look at specifically for Queen Anne's County, and that was the jobs and rehab tax credit situation. In the last 20, 21, 22 years, property owners in Queen Anne's County have qualified for $1 million of tax credits. That sounds like a lot. It's not, for over 20 years. That would mean, if you do the multiplier, that's 20. You get a 20% refundable tax credit. So if you spend $100 on a property, qualified, Mother May I through Maryland Historical Trust, you spend $100, they'll send you back 20. They'll either reduce your tax credit, or if you don't have a tax bill to absorb that tax credit, they'll send you back the rest as a check. So it's a very valuable tax credit, and it supports high-paying, good trades jobs locally. Plumbers, carpenters, all the kind of people who have to lay hands on a building. It's more valuable to put historic preservation money into buildings than new construction, roads, new houses, everything. It's all more valuable to the county to encourage economic development through historic preservation than through new development. I'm not saying you don't want new development. You do. You want to be a prosperous county in order to support historic preservation. There's no question of that. But don't ignore the fact that you can get payoff by encouraging property owners to invest in their property. So we want to figure out how can we get that for you. So jobs and rehab tax credits is one big benefit of historic preservation. The others are sort of the better known, the heritage tourism and placemaking piece of it. People really love coming to Queen Anne's County. The whole business of heritage, history and community, you saw that, I think, in the statistics. I think you scratch anybody here. I mean, I could have a conversation with long ago when I first moved here, more than 20 years ago, I had a conversation with a guy pumping gas for me back when they did that. And he started telling me about a history story for Queen Anne's County. You know, it's just everywhere. You find it everywhere. So let's encourage that. People are proud of the county. It's a part of your identity. And there's an economic value to that. People want to invest in a community that loves itself. And then lastly, the environmental benefits. It keeps stuff out of the landfills. The greenest building is buildings already built. We should really be careful what we tear down because there's a lot of energy invested in that, a lot of cost of replacement. The greenest building is the buildings already built. So those are some benefits. So looking at the list of key issues, you don't have enough recent information about your historic properties. Best practice is to try to go out 50 years, anything 50 years or older. And that means that buildings from 1980 on, or 1970 on, are old now. And you at least need to know what's out there. I spotted a really nice mid-century modern building out on Kent Island. And we don't know where those are. And it's good to know where they are. It's just good to have an inventory. So we really want to see an understanding of where all that is and encourage private residential investment, try to prevent the loss of resources. Part of that is that I think some owners may not appreciate what they have. Let's get the story out there, more stories, as I said earlier. A Historic Preservation Commission could help lead this. When people hear Historic Preservation Commission, they think zoning. And it does come under the land use ordinance, your power to create the Historic Preservation Commission. But we see it as being modeled along the lines of what Kent County has already done for years, actually. And it allows property owners to voluntarily get a designation from the county, which would qualify them for those rehab tax credits from the Maryland Historical Trust. That's about the only regulatory piece of this. Really, the Historic Preservation Commission is to help lead the inventorying, encourage more National Register nominations. For a county of the count that you've got in terms of the Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties, which is more than 700, you only have 39 properties listed in the National Register. I'm used to, in counties that bring me in, I'm used to finding about 100 when I open Wikipedia and I go look. Which you can do for Queen Anne's County and go see where they are. And the list is also in your document. You have 68 or so already knowing they're eligible. And all they have to do is get listed if they want. If they're listed, they can get the tax credit. It's hard to get a listing. So that's why the county, as a substitute for going through the National Register, is needed. So the commission becomes a place where there's conversation about what the community needs. Support for the Historic Sites Consortium, which is a model nationwide. You guys created this thing in the 1990s, and it's still popular. People still, are hungry for those little brochures. And I think now when people are sort of visiting from home, the opportunity on Saturdays as spring is here to go see those sites is a benefit for your community. There is one tiny amount of money available. It's not a whole lot of money, but I talked to Catherine Hager, your county clerk, about doing this. The state allows the county to request that a portion of the marriage license fee be devoted to historic resources. It would be about $1,000, so I'm not promising you the moon here, but it would be a start. It would get you a place to put funds, and then you could get mitigation money from state highway projects or other kinds of things that happen in the area. And, there's a very big state highway project beginning to be discussed.
You think?
Yeah, maybe. You know, mitigation in terms of how long, oh Lord, has Kent Island suffered might be a conversation you could be having about funding for somebody else besides the county's own tax monies to go into some of this. But that's a long-term thing. But I'm sort of trying to get you on a trajectory to have more resources to devote to the things that Queen Anne's County can and I think should do. The History Book Project is something that's been hanging around for a long time. A lot of people know about it. You have a committee that's formed to try to get the funding. I think you should challenge them. And your big opportunity is, remember the bicentennial and how everybody got really excited about the bicentennial? Well, the semi-quincentennial, the 250th, is 2026. And so it's time to get ready. And you have an incredible opportunity. You have so much pre-revolutionary history here and sites and resources. So, you know, a history book project at this point would then become the ability to, you know, get a lot more stories recorded of a wide variety and really be like your Emery history book, the Emery book, which was 1876. So now we're talking 2026 to get a really great book in place for the future. So there's a lot of different ideas in the plan. It's really exciting. People in the participation in our workshop have been very lively, very passionate about all this. And I think if you put this in place, I think you'll find a lot of support in the community for it. Good. All right.
So did anyone have any specific questions or comments about the draft itself? As a reminder, we are still continuing to get some comments back from county staff, and we'll be incorporating that. And there are already a few places where we expect to have some changes within this draft. So to build on those efforts, any questions or comments that you all may have? Nope. Okay.
Anything? Okay. So that brings us to public comments.
Actually, before I just have one little thing to just to mention. So this slide is our traditional slide with some upcoming dates. We have another few special topic workshops, and then the one in June will be our last workshop. So there's 3 more left for the public to participate in.
These are all virtual?
Yes. Mm-hmm. If anything changes, we'll definitely let you know, but at this point we are still planning to hold these virtually. And then the next few Planning Commission meetings are listed. So next month we will be discussing economic development and tourism. And then in June we have both the standard workshop that takes place during your regular meeting and then the special meeting later on in the month to look at town planning, community plans, environmental resources, and then to revisit the community facilities and services chapter specifically, since that does tie in with so many of the environmental resource components. So I do one more comment. If there are any additional comments for these chapters or any of the ones that we have already reviewed and discussed, as you've had time to sort of think about them some more or see some of the other sections, if it's jogged any new comments or questions, please, we're just asking that you either send them to Stephanie, who will share them with us, or you can send them directly to me and I will share them back to the staff. This opportunity to look at these drafts, it's great that we have this amount of time before we get to that next draft, which is really what we are looking for as sort of the precursor to that official draft plan that will then move forward into the formalized review process. So we're hoping that if you all do have any additional comments or questions, you let us know as soon as possible so that we can adequately address them here, and then we don't get to the point where we're at the 11th hour before the draft plan and then either revising or just wanting to make sure that everything fits appropriately within the plan itself. So any of those comments or questions, please let us know about them. And then speaking about the next drafts, just wanted to get your input on how you would like those to be presented. The actual chapters, would you be more comfortable seeing something in a track changes form, or just more of a within your briefing memo that highlights major changes, or within the document itself sort of highlighted or colorized areas that just show where those changes
Usually
have
the
taken
document
place?
itself with the colored areas, I would think. What do you think?
Same.
So sort of more just block highlights of areas that have had changes. Wonderful. That is great. All right. Well, with that, again, any comments or questions, please send them to us. And we thank you so much for having us before you this morning, and look forward to seeing you next month.
Okay. Any public comments?
We did have some people join late. I see Jack now has just started his video. I'm going to unmute Jack, and I believe he has a
Jack?
comment to make. Oops, sorry. I just muted you. That's my fault, Jack.
It looks like he's trying to talk.
Here we go. All right, hold on, Jack. We can't hear you, mate.
How about now?
Yep, we got you.
All right, we got you
Okay,
now.
great. Thank you guys very much. I just wanted to affirm from the point of view of the Kent Island Heritage Society that I represent, that this has been quite a dynamic process. I want to thank Amy and Lauren and Elizabeth for their role in this. And I really do encourage you to take a strong look at the draft. I think this is our best opportunity yet for Queen Anne's County to step up and carry our heritage forward. Elizabeth said it's not only about the places, but about the stories. We have rich stories. And this is a real opportunity not to just depend on nonprofits and passionate people who care like we do now, but to continue to have them and us involved as partners, but have the county assume a more proactive role. I think this draft, as it's presented to you all today, it's been quite well thought out, very well articulated, and I strongly encourage you to take a very positive view of that going forward. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Jack. Any other ones?
We didn't have any more comments, but I did want to just, because Jay Falls had asked a question, I just wanted to make sure he knew that you guys had got the letter from Jay.
We did.
I had also emailed it to Commissioner Reese also. So everyone did get your comment, Jay, and he did then call in, leaving a voicemail saying he had additional comments to call him. But I don't have that ability with my setup to just call him into the meeting. That's all.
Now, for him to give additional comments, or for
Yeah,
us?
he wanted to give more comments, and he asked us to call his number, but
Oh.
I don't have that ability to do that through Zoom to call anyone.
All right, that's the end?
That's all.
Okay, then I'm looking for one of my favorite motions.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second? All in favor? Aye.